My name is Priya, and I am 29 years. 18 months ago, I shared an app concept with my brother over dinner, and 3 months later, he launched it as his own company. The idea was simple but specific. A platform connecting independent farmers directly with restaurants, cutting out the distribution middlemen who took enormous margins while farmers struggled and restaurant owners paid inflated prices for produce that traveled too far and arrived too late. I had been developing it for almost a year. Not casually, seriously. I worked in agricultural economics, had spent my career studying exactly the inefficiencies my app would solve. I had notebooks full of market research, conversations with 43 local farmers about their actual needs, prototype sketches I had paid a freelance designer to refine using savings I had been collecting specifically for this purpose. My brother Dev worked in software development. When I mentioned the concept at our parents' anniversary dinner, I was looking for technical advice. How difficult would the backend actually be to build? What platform would make sense? Whether my vision was technically feasible or hopelessly naive. Dev had been encouraging. "This is brilliant," he said. "You should definitely pursue this." I had felt, that evening, the particular warmth of a sibling who believes in you completely. 3 months later, he launched Farm Direct. The exact concept. The exact target market. Even the color scheme matched the prototype sketches I had shown him over dinner, the specific shade of green the first had chosen because it reminded me of the farms I had visited during my research. He had not asked permission. He had not mentioned, at any point during those 3 months, that he was building it himself. I found out through a tech industry newsletter that profiled promising startups, featuring Dev's face and Dev's name beside a description of an app that was unmistakably mine. I called him immediately. "Dev," I said. "Farm Direct. That's my idea." A pause that lasted slightly too long. "I mean, the concept evolved," he said. "I did a lot of additional research, brought in different functionality. The core concept is identical," I said. "The target market is identical. The color scheme is identical to my prototype. Ideas aren't owned, Priya," he said. "You can't copyright a concept." "I'm not talking about copyright," I said. "I'm talking about basic decency. I spent a year developing this. I shared it with you in confidence as my brother, looking for technical advice. Not so you could build it yourself without telling me." "You never said it was confidential," he said. "It was my family," I said. At dinner. I shouldn't have to specify that sharing an idea with my brother doesn't mean granting permission to steal it. "That's a strong word," he said. "It's the accurate word," I said. I spent that night going through my own documentation. The notebooks, dated and detailed. The 43 farmer interviews, recorded with permission, time-stamped. The prototype sketches with the freelance designer's invoice showing exactly when I had paid for them, 3 months before the dinner where I shared the concept with Dev. I had built a paper trail without realizing I was building one. The particular habit of someone who had learned, through her academic career, that ideas without documentation were vulnerable to exactly this kind of dispute. I called my closest friend Jessica, who happened to be an intellectual property lawyer. "Tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning." I told her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "This is more complicated than typical idea theft," she said. "Because you can't patent a business concept. But you have substantial documentation predating his launch. And, depending on how directly he copied specific elements, the color scheme, the prototype design, there might be more concrete intellectual property issues." "What should I do?" I said. "First," she said, "let's see exactly how similar his actual product is to your documented work. Then we'll know what options actually exist." I downloaded Dev's app the next morning. Sitting at my kitchen table with my own prototype sketches spread beside my laptop, I went through Farm Direct feature by feature, screen by screen, comparing it against 18 months of my own development work. The similarities were not subtle. The core user flow, how farmers listed produce, how restaurants browsed and ordered, how the platform calculated delivery logistics, matched my prototype almost exactly. Not the kind of similarity that happens when two people independently solve the same problem using obvious solutions. The kind of similarity that happens when someone has access to detailed prior work and uses it as a blueprint. Even small interface decisions matched. The way farmers could upload photos of their produce, the specific verification badge system for organic certification, the unusual decision to display farm-to-table distance prominently on every listing. All elements I had specifically designed based on my 43 farmer interviews, elements that addressed concerns those farmers had raised about existing platforms. These weren't obvious industry standard features. These were my specific solutions to problems I had identified through original research. I photographed everything, documented every comparison point, building the same kind of meticulous evidence trail that my professional training had taught me to value. Jessica reviewed everything that evening. "This is significant," she said. "The specific feature decisions, especially ones tied directly to your documented farmer interviews, these aren't generic industry features he could claim he developed independently. These are answers to specific problems you identified through original research." "What does that mean legally?" I said. "It means we have a strong case for trade secret misappropriation," she said. "Your detailed notes, your specific research methodology, your prototype, if he used confidential information you shared with him to build a competing product, that's potentially actionable." "Even though we're family?" I said. "Family doesn't exempt anyone from intellectual property law," Jessica said. "If anything, the dinner conversation context actually helps establish that this was shared in a confidential setting between trusted parties, not posted publicly for anyone to use." I requested a meeting with Dev. Not confrontational, deliberately calm, the same approach I had learned through years of presenting research findings to skeptical stakeholders. I wanted him to understand exactly what evidence existed before he decided how to respond. He arrived at my apartment looking defensive before I had said anything. I had prepared a presentation. Side-by-side comparisons. Time-stamped documentation. The freelance designer's invoice. The farmer interview recordings. Everything organized with the same methodical precision I brought to my academic work. "I want to show you something," I said. I walked him through it systematically. His face changed as the evidence accumulated, not dramatically, but with the particular shift of someone watching their justification become increasingly indefensible. "I didn't think of it as stealing," he said finally. "I thought I was building something inspired by our conversation. I added my own development work." "You added code," I said. "You didn't add the core concept, the target market identification, the specific feature decisions based on actual farmer needs. Those came from a year of my research that I shared with you in confidence." "What do you want?" he said. "I want acknowledgement," I said. "And I want to discuss what fair partnership looks like, given that this app exists because of work I did before you ever heard about it." The negotiations took 6 weeks. Not because Dev was hostile. Once confronted with clear evidence, he became surprisingly cooperative. The particular relief of someone who had been carrying guilt and was grateful for the opportunity to address it directly rather than continuing to defend an increasingly untenable position. "I panicked," he admitted during our second meeting, this time with both our lawyers present. "I'd been struggling professionally. 2 failed startup attempts before this. When you described Farm Direct, I saw something that actually had market validation, real research behind it. I told myself building it was different from copying it because I was adding technical execution. Technical execution matters, I said. But it's not the same as conceptual ownership. The hardest part, identifying the actual problem, validating it through real research, designing solutions based on genuine user needs, that work was mine. I know that now, he said. We eventually reached an agreement that acknowledged both contributions honestly. I would receive equity reflecting my role as co-founder, acknowledged publicly as the originator of the core concept and research foundation. Dev would retain his role overseeing technical development, the area where his actual expertise had genuinely contributed value. The agreement wasn't perfect. Some trust, once broken through deception, doesn't fully repair through legal settlement alone. But it was fair, documented properly, protecting both of our actual contributions rather than allowing one person's theft to erase another's foundational work. My mother found out during the negotiation process. She called me, clearly upset, asking why I hadn't mentioned the conflict sooner. I didn't want to put you in the middle, I said. I'm already in the middle, she said. You're both my children. I want to understand what actually happened before I form opinions based on partial information. I told her everything, including the documentation, the comparison analysis, Dev's eventual acknowledgement. She was quiet for a long moment. He should have told you immediately, she said finally. Whether he believed he was building something different or not, basic honesty required telling you what he was doing with the concept you shared. Thank you for saying that, I said. I'm not choosing sides for the sake of being kind to whoever sounds most sympathetic, she said. I'm looking at facts. The facts show he took your work without telling you. That's wrong regardless of family relationships. Farm Direct relaunched 8 months later under both our names. Co-founders, properly documented, properly credited. The company had grown significantly during the relaunch period, partnering with over 200 farmers and 40 restaurant chains across 3 states. I led product strategy and market research, building on the foundation I had originally developed. Dev focused on technical infrastructure and engineering, the genuine area of expertise he brought to the partnership. It worked. Not because the conflict was forgotten, but because we had finally built a structure based on honest acknowledgement of who contributed what, rather than one person's contribution erasing another's entirely. I think about it sometimes, Dev said one evening, during a particularly successful product launch celebration. What would have happened if I just asked you to be co-founder from the beginning instead of trying to build it alone? You'd have had a much easier 18 months, I said. And I wouldn't have spent 6 weeks documenting evidence and consulting lawyers. I know, he said. I think I was scared that if I asked properly, you might say no. Or that you might get more credit than I felt comfortable with. That fear cost both of us significant time and trust, I said. I know that now, he said. I had learned something important through the entire experience. Documentation matters not because you expect betrayal, but because protecting your own work requires evidence that exists independent of anyone's willingness to acknowledge your contribution honestly. The notebooks I had kept, the time-stamped research, the recorded interviews, none of it had been created in anticipation of my brother's deception. It had been created because thorough research requires documentation. That habit, built for entirely different reasons, became the foundation that allowed truth to eventually prevail over a more convenient. 1 year after the relaunch, Farm Direct had become something genuinely significant. The platform now operated across 7 states, partnering with over 600 farmers and connecting them directly with restaurants that valued fresh, ethically sourced produce. The original problem I had identified, the inefficient, exploitative distribution system that hurt both farmers and restaurants, was being meaningfully addressed at scale. I stood at an industry conference, presenting our growth data to an audience of agricultural economists and food industry professionals. Dev sat in the front row. After my presentation, during the question period, someone asked about the company's origin story. I told it honestly. The year of research. The 43 farmer interviews. The dinner conversation where I shared the concept with my brother. The complicated months that followed, including the genuine conflict over proper credit and contribution. The audience listened with particular attention during that section. We eventually resolved it properly, I said. Through honest conversation, documented evidence, and ultimately, a partnership structure that reflects what each of us actually contributed. It wasn't an easy process, but it resulted in something more sustainable than either of us could have built through deception or unilateral action. Dev found me afterward. "Thank you for telling that honestly," he said. "Including the difficult part." "The difficult part is part of the actual story," I said. "Pretending it didn't happen wouldn't honor what we eventually built together." "I'm grateful you didn't just walk away," he said. "When you found out what I'd done, you could have simply built something competing or pursued legal action without any interest in partnership." "I believed in the idea enough to fight for proper credit," I said. "And I believed our relationship was worth the difficult conversations required to rebuild trust properly." "Was it worth it?" he said. I looked at the conference room, at the genuine impact our platform was having on farmers who had been struggling against exploitative distribution systems for generations. "Yes," I said. "Though I hope you understand that the foundation of trust we're operating on now exists because I had documentation, not because deception naturally resolves itself through goodwill alone." "I understand that completely," he said. "I want to say something to you. If someone has ever taken credit for work that was originally yours, an idea shared in confidence, research conducted carefully, a concept developed through genuine effort that someone else claimed as entirely their own, document everything. Not because you anticipate betrayal specifically, but because thorough work naturally creates evidence of its own development. When theft happens despite your best intentions toward trust and family loyalty, that documentation becomes the difference between protest and proof, between feeling wronged and demonstrating exactly how and when the wrong occurred. Confront the situation directly, with evidence rather than only emotion. Most people, when faced with clear documentation, eventually acknowledge what happened rather than continuing to defend an increasingly indefensible position. And sometimes, if both parties remain genuinely willing to rebuild on honest terms, what emerges from properly resolved conflict can become something more substantial than what either person could have built alone through deception or unilateral action. The work you do carefully and document thoroughly remains yours, regardless of who attempts to claim it as their own. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Has anyone ever taken credit for your work or stolen your ideas? Share your story in the comments. I read every single one. Tell me where you are watching from. I love knowing how far these stories reach. Until next time, document everything. Your work deserves protection.